My children made me doubt my own memories, insisting, "It's your memory, not mine," when I confronted them about missing documents. As a former psychologist, I employed precise observational skills to expose their gaslighting and reclaim my mental clarity. Before we begin, share in the comments, what would you do in that situation? Every voice matters. Thanks. It's just your memory, mother, not mine. My daughter-in-law, Clara, delivered the line with a practiced sigh, a weary resignation in her tone, as if patiently correcting a wayward child. Her eyes, however, held a glint of something cold and calculating, a flicker eye Dr. Evelyn Hayes had spent 40 years dissecting in the human psyche. I sat across from her at the ornate dining table, my gaze seemingly lost on the elaborate floral centerpiece, but my mind, a finely tuned instrument of observation, was recording every nuance of her tone, every dismissive gesture. The small, discreet voice recorder, nestled securely in the pocket of my cardigan, hummed almost imperceptibly, a silent witness to their slow, insidious campaign. The opulent dining room, with its crystal chandelier shimmering like frozen rain and walls adorned with priceless landscapes, felt less like a home and more like a stage where a sinister play unfolded. And I, the lead actress, was performing the role of the confused, declining matriarch. It had begun subtly, weeks ago, after my fall down the grand staircase of my Georgetown brownstone. A convenient accident, occurring just a day after I had expressed my intent to review the intricate trust documents my late husband, Arthur, and I had meticulously established for our philanthropic foundation. That morning, I'd been vibrant, discussing new grant proposals with my assistant, Sarah, my mind as sharp as ever. By evening, I lay crumpled at the foot of the stairs, a searing pain in my hip, my world tilted irrevocably. Now, with a surgically repaired hip that still throbbed with a phantom ache, and under a new regimen of medications I secretly diluted, I was a prisoner, not in a physical cell, but within the gilded cage of my son David's sprawling suburban estate. Dr. Bernard, a family friend whom David had called in, had insisted I needed constant, family supervision over professional nursing care, a suggestion I found highly irregular given my previous robust health. He'd spoken of post-trauma cognitive fog with a grave, concerned expression that never quite reached his eyes. My own brother, Thomas, whose eyes skittered away from mine with an unsettling frequency, stood by the mantelpiece during family gatherings, a silent, complicit observer in this unfolding domestic drama, his face a mask of discomfort. "Time for your evening tea, Evelyn dear," Clara chirped, her voice cloying, wheeling my chair away from the hushed gathering in the living room. Her fingers dug into my shoulder with an almost imperceptible pressure, a physical manifestation of the control she now wielded over my very movement, a constant, subtle reminder of my helplessness. I had observed her checking the security camera in the hallway before she pushed me into what was once Arthur's private study, now designated my bedroom. The lock clicked shut with a definitive, chilling finality. I was alone again, left to stare out the bay window at the distant city lights, a stark contrast to the brilliant skyline of Washington, D.C. that I had once navigated with effortless authority. The irony of my situation was a bitter pill. I, a former clinical psychologist who had dedicated her life to helping others untangle the complex web of manipulation and deceit, now found myself caught in its sticky threads, woven by the very people I had loved and trusted. My son's mansion, with its pristine white walls and elegant furnishings, felt more like a padded cell than a home, each day a new exercise in psychological warfare. Clara's parting words echoed in the sudden silence. "You should rest now. Dr. Bernard says too much stimulation isn't good for your condition." The condescension in her voice was almost palpable. Once the soft echo of her footsteps faded down the long hallway, I retrieved the small recorder from my pocket and placed it under my pillow. Next to a folded letter I'd discovered earlier, a disturbing exchange between David and Judge Miller, discussing a joint venture in real estate development. The very same type of opaque dealings I had begun to investigate before my sudden, forced early retirement 3 years prior. My hands, once steady instruments of analysis, now trembled not from the effects of age or illness, but from a simmering, righteous fury that ignited a spark within me. They had meticulously orchestrated every step of this cruel charade. My premature retirement, designed to remove me from scrutinizing their illicit activities. The suspicious alteration of Arthur's will, executed during my vulnerable state of grief after his passing. And now, this calculated imprisonment, intended to drain my assets before declaring me legally incompetent. A hushed phone conversation I'd overheard David having confirmed their timeline. I was to be declared legally incompetent within 47 days. The psychological game had begun, and they, my unsuspecting family, had no idea they were already being clinically observed and judged. My mind, a finely honed instrument, was already building its countercase. My new gilded cage, a meticulously appointed guest suite with a view of manicured gardens, was more than just a bedroom. It was my new laboratory and I, the chief investigator. I charted my captivity with the precision of a field researcher, cataloging every detail. The security cameras, subtly embedded in the cornices, had blind spots I meticulously mapped out in my mind, tracing their angles, envisioning their fields of vision. The staff schedules, overheard snippets of conversation, and the subtle variations in their daily routines became critical data points. I even noted Clara's hushed instructions to the hired nurse, Maria. "We need to adjust her evening sedative again. She was far too engaged during the dinner party last night. It makes her seem lucid." The nurse, a young woman with a perpetually anxious expression, nodded, her gaze avoiding mine. My room, what had once been Arthur's private study, was subjected to a daily, almost imperceptible search. Letters I received were obviously opened and resealed, the faint crease on the envelope giving them away. Phone calls, when permitted, were clearly monitored, the line occasionally crackling with a telltale electronic interference. Even my prescribed medications, administered with military-like regularity, tasted subtly different from the original pharmacy doses I remembered, a bitter, chalky quality that bespoke substitution. Clara had meticulously reprogrammed my entire daily regimen, ensuring I was drowsy and seemingly disoriented during any potential visitor interactions, yet frustratingly alert and lucid during the solitary hours of the night when I was least able to act. It was a cruel irony, this enforced wakefulness, but one I intended to exploit. During one of these restless midnight vigils, my mind, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, uncovered the true prize they sought. Behind the large, framed portrait of the Boston Harbor in my room, a painting I'd always loved in Arthur's old office, I found a hidden wall safe. My fingers traced the faint outline of its edges beneath the canvas, a subtle difference in the plaster behind the thick frame. And what was inside? The original, untouched foundation documents, along with several sensitive financial ledgers, bound in faded leather. If they succeeded in selling my Georgetown brownstone, as David had been relentlessly suggesting, they would gain unfettered access to these critical papers without raising any suspicion. My intellect, which had spent decades dissecting the most intricate financial frauds and the most cunning psychological manipulations in Washington, D.C., was now sharpening its focus, turning its formidable analytical power inward, dissecting the very fabric of my own betrayal. My brother Thomas entered my room without a knock, his knuckles rapping softly on the already ajar door. He always seemed to be hovering, a nervous tremor in his hands, his gaze perpetually shifting. "Evelyn, are you awake? I brought those books you asked for." He held up a stack of hardcovers, their spines glinting under the dim lamplight. I observed him carefully, noting the way his eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact with mine, and the conspicuous new luxury watch glinting on his wrist. It was a gift from David, I suspected, a shiny, gilded cage to secure his cooperation. "Thank you, Thomas," I murmured, leaning into my carefully constructed persona of gentle confusion. "I forget. Did you bring the classic literature or the true crime novels?" He hesitated, a fleeting flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "The classics, Evelyn, you always loved the classics." Another test failed. I hadn't specified any genre, and his immediate, confident answer only confirmed my suspicion. He was either complicit or incredibly careless, too eager to please David to think clearly. "Oh yes, of course," I said, letting my gaze drift to the window. "The classics, how wonderful." After he left, I overheard David on the phone in the hallway, his voice a low, urgent murmur. "The neurological assessment is confirmed for the 15th. Yes, we absolutely need the competency evaluation completed before the coastal development closing. Miller assured me he'll expedite it, but even he needs proper documentation of her decline. You know how meticulous she was." The pieces were aligning, forming a chillingly clear picture. 47 days. That was the timeline they had set to legally strip me of my autonomy, to invalidate my will, and to seize control of everything I had built. 47 days to build my countercase, to gather enough evidence to dismantle their elaborate, cruel charade. The game was on, and this time I was playing for my freedom, my legacy, and my very sanity. The cold fury in my gut settled into a hard, diamond-like resolve. That night, the stale air of captivity pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. I meticulously jimmy opened the window latch with a bobby pin I'd pilfered from Clara's forgotten vanity kit, a small, illicit victory. The cool, crisp Boston spring air rushed in, a tantalizing whisper of the freedom I craved, the first true breath I'd taken in weeks. But the three-story drop to the manicured garden below made any thought of physical escape impossible, especially with my still recovering hip. My eyes, however, scanned the familiar landscape until they settled on the distant glow from my teenage granddaughter Lily's bedroom window, still brightly lit. Unlike the others, Lily had shown genuine, albeit subtle, signs of concern, a quiet resistance to her parents' carefully constructed narrative of my senility. She would meet my gaze for a fleeting second, a flicker of empathy that betrayed the indifference her parents demanded. I angled a small, reflective compact mirror I'd secreted away, catching the moonlight and directing it toward her window in a series of precise, deliberate flashes. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS, it was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but I had taught Lily rudimentary Morse code during a particularly boring summer when she was 10, a game we used to communicate across the house. A moment later, her light blinked back the same pattern, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. My first potential ally, a glimmer of hope in this suffocating darkness. The irony was not lost on me. A once powerful psychologist, now reduced to depending on the intuitive understanding of a 16-year-old girl. But justice, I had learned through countless cases, often emerges from the most unexpected corners, from the most unlikely hands. As I quietly closed the window, securing the bobby pin back into place, I recalled the words I had spoken to so many defendants and victims alike throughout my career. The truth finds its way to the surface. Always, for the first time since my accident, a faint but steady stirring of hope began to pulse within me. The next day, a carefully orchestrated family intervention took place. David had gathered everyone, Clara, Thomas, and my daughter Diane, who seemed to wilt under his gaze, along with a stranger, Dr. Emily Stone, a neurologist introduced as an independent expert. "We're concerned about your continued confusion, Evelyn," David explained, his voice smooth and modulated, almost like a prosecutor laying out a case. He sat at the head of the dining table, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, flanked by Clara, who wore a mask of sympathetic concern. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze, and Diane fidgeted nervously with her napkin. David clicked through a series of slides on a laptop, a PowerPoint presentation titled Mother's Care Plan. The title itself was a calculated insult. "These episodes are becoming more frequent, Evelyn," he continued, his voice clinically detached, as if discussing a pathology. "Last Tuesday, you couldn't even recognize your own brother. You called him Arthur." A blatant lie. I hadn't made any such mistake. My internal monologue scoffed at his amateurish attempts. "And you've been making increasingly concerning financial decisions," Clara added, sliding a meticulously organized folder across the polished table. "Fortunately, David has been diligently monitoring your accounts and has taken proactive steps to prevent any further lapses." Dr. Stone nodded gravely, murmuring about memory lapses and financial confusion post-trauma, a vague, noncommittal assent that still lent an air of medical authority. I tilted my head, adopting my most vacant and confused expression, perfecting the performance I had rehearsed in countless therapy sessions, teaching patients how to blend in or hide their true intentions. "I don't remember any confusion with my finances," I murmured, my voice a soft, slightly bewildered whisper. "That's exactly the point, Mother," David said, softening his voice with a practiced, saccharine concern that made my stomach churn. "You don't remember." Documents I had never seen, bearing signatures that supposedly belonged to me, were passed around the table. 3 years as a prosecutor and 20 years as a judge on the family court had taught me to recognize forgery, and these were glaringly obvious, crude attempts at imitating my distinct, firm signature. "I'd like a second opinion," I said mildly, a tremor of weakness in my voice testing their resolve. Dr. Stone offered a condescending smile. "You've already seen 3 specialists, Mrs. Hayes. All concur that complex financial decisions are simply too stressful for you right now." Another calculated lie. I had seen one specialist, Dr. Bernard, and he was David's pawn. Thomas, I said softly, turning to my brother, you've known me longest. Do you truly believe I'm incapable of managing my own affairs? His eyes flickered nervously to David, then back to me, clouded with a mixture of fear and something akin to shame. Evelyn, you haven't been yourself. Sometimes you seem fine, yes. But then you get confused, you forget things. The betrayal stung, a fresh, painful wound, but I merely nodded, cataloging each deception, each manipulation, each subtle act of psychological abuse for the comprehensive case I was now meticulously building against them. Later that night, unable to sleep, I slipped quietly from my bed, drawn by the faint sound of hushed, angry voices from the garden below. It was David and Thomas, their argument carried clearly on the cool night air through my slightly ajar window. This isn't what I agreed to, David, Thomas hissed, his voice strained with desperation. You said we were protecting her from making rash decisions while she recovered, not taking everything from her. He sounded genuinely distressed but too weak to stand firm. Your financial problems won't solve themselves, Thomas, David replied, his voice chillingly devoid of emotion, unless you've found another way to cover your mounting gambling debts. Thomas slumped, his shoulders visibly defeated. Just promise me she'll be taken care of. That she'll be safe. I can't live with myself if something happens to her. Of course, she'll have the best care money can buy, David answered smoothly, using the exact same tone he used when addressing clients in my courtroom, a voice designed to project trustworthiness and empathy while concealing a core of ruthless ambition. A crucial piece of the puzzle clicked into place, illuminating a dark corner of their scheme. Thomas was merely a pawn, a desperate man leveraged by David's knowledge of his debilitating financial troubles, coerced into corroborating their manufactured claims about my mental state. But David wasn't just after my money. The sophisticated legal mechanisms they were employing, the specific terminology, the rapid pace of the competency hearing, all suggested a much larger, more intricate scheme, possibly connected to the shadowy real estate investigation I had begun before my forced retirement. The stakes were higher than I had initially realized, far beyond a simple inheritance grab. My freedom, my legacy, and potentially the integrity of the judicial system itself were on the line. Time was rapidly running out. The persistent ache in my hip, a stark reminder of my engineered accident, woke me at precisely 2:17 a.m. Clara had adjusted my medication again, I realized, replacing my much-needed pain relief with a stronger sedative. But I had been palming the pills for days, carefully secreting them away behind a loose brick in the fireplace, valuing mental clarity above physical comfort. I eased myself up with practiced silence, my movements fluid and deliberate, reaching for the crutches I had cleverly hidden beneath the bed frame, opting for them over the cumbersome wheelchair they preferred. Weeks of painstaking, clandestine nighttime explorations had taught me the security guards' rotation patterns, the precise timing of their patrols, and most importantly, the exact blind spots of every security camera in the house. A sliver of dim light spilled from David's study, the door unexpectedly ajar, a rare oversight on his part, perhaps due to the late hour and his escalating anxiety. We need that competency ruling immediately, David, Clara's voice, sharp with urgency, carried clearly through the narrow gap. The National Bank is starting to question the foundation transfers. They're asking too many uncomfortable questions, especially about the discrepancies in the initial filings. I leaned closer, my heart thumping a silent rhythm against my ribs, glimpsing a video call on David's laptop screen. A man on the screen, whose face was vaguely familiar but now clearer in the dim light, responded with a grim expression. Dr. Hayes built an impeccable reputation over decades. We need more concrete evidence of incapacity. Her previous public record speaks volumes, and the bank's legal team is thorough. Judge Miller promised to expedite the administrative process, David snapped, his patience clearly wearing thin, but even he can't ignore proper procedures completely, not with her profile. Especially not with the current scrutiny on ethical practices. I recognized Judge Miller then, the same colleague who had subtly questioned my stability 3 years ago when I had begun investigating a series of irregular, suspiciously swift approvals for luxury coastal developments, approvals that now seemed to directly benefit David's real estate partners. My name is on documents she shouldn't have signed, David continued, his voice laced with panic. If she somehow regains control and reviews those papers, the implications, the legal repercussions could be catastrophic. My entire career, possibly my freedom, is at stake. The chilling realization hit me with the force of a blow. He had been systematically forging my signature on critical legal documents, possibly for years, linking me to his illicit ventures. As I shifted slightly, my crutch scraped against a delicate decorative vase, producing a faint, telltale sound. "What was that?" Clara hissed, her voice sharp with suspicion. I froze, my breath held. Then, with a burst of manufactured confusion, I retreated as fast as my recovering hip would allow, my heart pounding a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. But David found me in the hallway, where I quickly resumed my carefully constructed persona of disoriented confusion. "Mother, what are you doing out of bed?" he asked, his voice laced with a mixture of feigned concern and genuine alarm. "Bathroom," I mumbled, perfecting the vacant, mumbling elderly persona, my eyes wide and unfocused. Clara appeared instantly, her expression shifting from panic to a knowing, condescending smirk. "I'll adjust her evening medication, David. Clearly, it's wearing off too quickly." After they had escorted me back to my room with an almost theatrical display of parental concern, their hands on my elbows, their voices cloyingly sweet, I waited patiently until I was certain they had returned to their clandestine meeting, their hushed whispers fading into the background hum of the house. Only then did I retrieve the small, leather-bound notebook I had hidden within the hollowed-out spine of an old psychology textbook, another trick from my days prosecuting sophisticated financial crimes. I had been meticulously documenting every overheard conversation, every suspicious visitor, and every single discrepancy in my care. David's laptop password, Clara Hayes 714, his wife's name and her birthday, had been laughably easy to deduce. People, I had learned through decades of observing human behavior, rarely deviate from personal patterns, especially when under pressure. This simple fact had allowed me to unravel countless fraud cases. What I discovered on his laptop confirmed my worst, most agonizing suspicions. A chilling cache of emails detailing how David had altered Arthur's will, leveraging my medicated state after his death, a ruthless manipulation of my grief. Irrefutable evidence of David and Judge Miller's orchestrated partnership, meticulously planning to force my early retirement precisely when I had begun to investigate their illicit real estate venture. An extensive documentation of systematic, unauthorized transfers from my personal accounts to various offshore entities, cleverly disguised to avoid detection through a labyrinth of shell corporations. I added tonight's damning revelations to my growing case file, my judicial mind organizing the intricate web of evidence, even as my heart splintered into 1,000 pieces at the sheer, unimaginable depth of their betrayal. The son I had raised, the child I had nurtured, had turned every lesson I had taught him about ethics and integrity against me. My hand trembled, not from the fragility of age, but from a cold, clarifying anger that solidified my resolve. I finally understood the full, horrifying scope of what I was fighting for and what I stood to lose. "Did you enjoy your tea, Evelyn?" Clara asked, her voice saccharine, collecting my empty cup with that same patronizing smile that grated on my nerves. "Chamomile is my favorite," I lied sweetly, feigning a soft, grandmotherly tone. I hated chamomile as it made me terribly drowsy, a fact Arthur would have known instantly. Her ignorance of such a simple preference revealed the superficiality of her concern, the utter lack of genuine care. I now had exactly 42 days until the competency hearing, the legal proceeding they believed I knew nothing about. My mobility remained severely limited, my communications were tightly monitored, and my medications, though now strategically manipulated by me, were still under their ostensible control. Arrayed against me stood my son, a brilliant and ruthless attorney with powerful political connections, Clara, his wife, wielding significant social influence, a corrupt federal judge who was clearly entangled in their schemes, and a financially compromised brother, Thomas, who was too afraid or too indebted to break free from David's clutches. Direct confrontation, I knew, would be disastrous. They had already meticulously crafted a public image of me as frail and confused. It would be my word against theirs, buttressed by the fabricated testimony of multiple so-called experts. The solution to my predicament came to me from an old, complex corporate whistleblower case I had once presided over. The key was to outwardly reflect the expected image while covertly gathering irrefutable evidence. If they wanted a confused old woman, that is precisely what I would give them. I began deliberately misplacing common household items in plain sight, then finding them in absurd locations, feigning absorption in mindless daytime television, subtly eavesdropping on conversations, and occasionally calling Clara by my late mother's name, Martha, just to reinforce their narrative of my mental decline. "I'm genuinely worried about her, Clara," I overheard David tell his wife that evening, his voice tinged with a carefully modulated concern. "She seems to be deteriorating faster than Dr. Bernard predicted." "This is good, right?" "That's actually excellent news, darling," Clara replied, her voice cold and devoid of genuine warmth. "The hearing will go much smoother if her condition is obvious to everyone. There will be no room for doubt about her incapacity." I secretly adjusted my medication, meticulously hiding the palmed pills behind the bed frame's elaborate decorative molding, a blind spot for the ubiquitous camera, a tiny act of rebellion that filled me with quiet satisfaction. Decades of prosecuting sophisticated financial fraud had taught me an invaluable lesson. Even the most intricately woven schemes, even those with powerful conspirators, invariably possess vulnerabilities, often lurking within the very fabric of their communication. My first real opportunity to exploit such a weakness presented itself through Lily, my granddaughter, whose simmering resentment toward her overly controlling parents was palpable. During our daily crossword puzzle lessons, the only interaction Clara seemed to approve of, believing it stimulated my declining mind, I gently probed her boundaries. "Do your parents ever check your messages, Lily?" I asked casually, feigning a fleeting moment of confusion about how modern technology worked, my gaze fluttering innocently. The instantaneous flash of recognition in her eyes, the sudden stiffness in her posture, told me everything I needed to know. She was as trapped and monitored as I was. "They have parental controls on my phone, Grandma," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a quick glance around the room, but not on my school tablet. "It's for academic purposes, so it's unsecured. They trust me with that, surprisingly." That night, after Lily had quietly confirmed her willingness to help me, a heart-wrenching moment where she confided, her voice thick with emotion, "They're treating you like you're already gone, Grandma, like you're invisible." I carefully drafted a coded email to my former judicial assistant, the brilliant and fiercely loyal Sarah Jenkins. "Urgent review of Case 73E required. Documentation compromised. Secure channel needed. Personal security breached." Sarah, I knew, would immediately recognize our prearranged code for judicial corruption investigations and potential coercion, a signal we had established years ago for emergencies. As Lily bravely smuggled the tablet back to her room, I shifted my focus to John Cooper, the new driver assigned to my medical appointments. I had observed him closely during our infrequent trips, noting his respectful eye contact, his subtle acts of kindness, and his genuine, almost imperceptible assistance when helping me in and out of the car, never condescending. There was something familiar about him, something that nagged at the periphery of my memory. "Cognitive decline can manifest inconsistently, of course," Dr. Marcus Reed explained to David and Clara during one of my forced evaluations, as I deliberately blinked too slowly, feigning disorientation, my mind racing. 5 years ago, I had presided over a complex case involving his clinic's egregious insurance fraud. His eyes, though quickly masked, flickered with a brief, almost imperceptible recognition when David formally introduced us. During the actual evaluation, I expertly alternated between moments of sharp, piercing lucidity, answering complex math problems correctly, then immediately asking what day it was, and vague, generalized confusion, confusing him just enough to make him believe I was genuinely impaired. When the nurse briefly stepped out of the room, I dropped my performance instantly. "Dr. Reed," I said, my voice resuming its familiar, authoritative judicial timbre, cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. "I have exactly 30 seconds. I know every detail about your clinic's billing irregularities in 2020, every false claim, every inflated invoice. Those records were sealed, not destroyed, and I still have contacts in the DOJ. Sign a fabricated capacity declaration that states my cognitive decline is irreversible, and I will personally ensure those records are re-examined by federal prosecutors, with a direct link to your current practice." His face, initially flushed with arrogance, paled dramatically, sweat beading on his forehead. That's blackmail, Judge Hayes," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "It's survival, doctor," I countered, my gaze unwavering, "and an opportunity for your redemption. The choice is yours. Choose wisely." I reverted to my confused vacancy just as the nurse re-entered the room, leaving him visibly shaken, his professional demeanor a fractured mask. The very next day, as John Cooper helped me into the car for my physical therapy session, a flicker of that familiar recognition returned to my memory. As we pulled away from the mansion, he spoke, his voice low and carefully modulated, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "You don't remember me, do you, Judge Hayes?" I studied his reflection in the rearview mirror, my expression carefully blank. "Should I?" I tested. 10 years ago, Commonwealth versus Cooper, bank fraud case. I was the junior financial officer pressured by my superiors into making fraudulent transfers. "You saw through it." Recognition dawned, sharp and clear like a sudden burst of sunlight. John Cooper, the young man I had recognized as coerced by his superiors, whom I had given a second chance, ordering rehabilitation instead of prison, a rare decision that went against prevailing sentiment. "You gave me a second chance, Judge," he said quietly, his gaze steady in the mirror. "And now you work for my son." Changed my name slightly after the case for a fresh start. "Your son's background check was superficial, apparently, just a quick glance at public records." He met my eyes in the rearview mirror again, a shared understanding passing between us, a silent vow. "I recognized the signs the moment they hired me. The way they spoke about you, the unusually strict medication schedules, the blatant isolation. I've been watching." "And yet you've said nothing," I stated, not as an accusation, but as an observation, a gentle probe. "I've been waiting, watching for the right moment. For a sign from you. I knew if anyone could fight back, it would be you." He then reached into his glove compartment and handed me a small, secure, disposable cell phone, its battery indicator a reassuring green. "Your former clerk, Sarah, sends her regards. She's managed to embed herself within your son's law firm as a temporary secretary. Your old court contacts, Vivian Reed and a few others, arranged it. She's been waiting for your signal." My third crucial ally materialized when Judge Vivian Reed, a longtime colleague and dear friend from the appellate court, arrived for a seemingly innocuous, friendly visit. Clara, always hovering, remained glued to my side until Vivian, with a masterful display of comedic timing, launched into an excessively detailed, slightly graphic complaint about her unbearable menopause symptoms, complete with exaggerated facial expressions and dramatic sighs, sending my squeamish daughter-in-law fleeing from the room in obvious discomfort. "I received a concerning message, Evelyn," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper the moment Clara was out of earshot. "Sarah forwarded your code. Documentation compromised, secure channel needed. Tell me everything now without omitting a single detail." For 20 minutes, I systematically outlined the chilling narrative. My manipulated retirement, the suspicious alteration of my medications, the overheard plans for institutional commitment, the constant gaslighting, the meticulous attempts to undermine my sanity, the forgeries, the diverted funds. Vivian listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to a grim, steely determination, her jaw clenched. "They've miscalculated spectacularly, Evelyn," she finally said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "They see your physical vulnerability and assume cognitive decline. They've mistaken your body's temporary weakness for a deterioration of your formidable mind. A classic rookie mistake, underestimating the opponent." "Classic mistake, but tragically effective," I countered, my voice regaining a hint of its old strength. "They've isolated me, controlled my medication, monitored my communications, and are systematically building a public and legal case for my incompetence. Then we build a stronger, undeniable countercase," Vivian declared, squeezing my hand firmly, a silent promise of support that resonated deep within my soul. "Evelyn, you taught an entire generation of Boston's legal minds how to dissect financial conspiracies and expose psychological manipulation. It's time to apply those profound lessons to your own situation, with ruthless efficiency. We will make them regret ever underestimating you." That evening, during another meticulously staged charity gala hosted by David and Clara, my daughter-in-law, emboldened by several glasses of champagne, approached me. Her words slurred slightly as she introduced me to various guests as our dear Evelyn, who sadly can no longer distinguish past from present, insidiously suggesting I confused prominent political figures with soap opera characters, her laughter tinkling unnervingly. I responded by accidentally spilling a glass of red wine on her pristine white gown, a slow, deliberate tilt of my hand, reinforcing their carefully cultivated perception of my rapid decline, while the discreet recording device in my brooch, a cunning piece of miniature technology provided by Vivian, captured every condescending word, every dismissive chuckle, every patronizing pat on my arm. Later, reviewing the recordings with Sarah via John's secure phone, I noticed a disturbingly intimate tone in Clara's voice when she mentioned Judge Miller, a casual familiarity that suggested their connection extended far beyond a mere professional association. Another critical piece of the complex puzzle clicked into place. Their complicity was deeper, more personal than I had initially imagined. A romantic entanglement, perhaps. Something's happening with the coastal development approvals. David snapped into his phone, pacing his study, his voice tight with barely suppressed panic, while I pretended to doze fitfully on the sofa, a carefully constructed image of an elderly woman struggling with sleep. Someone's asking very pointed questions about our licensing process, especially the expedited approvals and the environmental impact reports. They're digging too deep. My strategy had entered its active, offensive phase. Through secure channels, Sarah had meticulously established, carefully selected fragments of information, just enough to pique curiosity, never enough for a formal investigation, had reached the ears of several tenacious financial reporters, sparking whispers in the industry. Simultaneously, Vivian had arranged for a prominent, notoriously aggressive investor in high-end coastal developments, known for his ruthless due diligence, to request an urgent, very public meeting with David, citing concerns about regulatory compliance and potential ethical breaches, particularly concerning the Foundation's involvement. Miller is feeling immense pressure from the Judicial Ethics Committee, David, Clara hissed to David later that night, their hushed argument carrying clearly through the heating vent to my room, the thin wall offering no privacy. There are rumors of an internal investigation. We need to finalize the competency ruling before she has any moment of clarity. Before she manages to pull herself together, even for a moment, and ruins everything. David, clearly agitated, had hired a renowned neuropsychiatrist, Dr. Noah Evans, for a definitive evaluation, completely unaware that Evans and I had served together on a highly discreet medical legal ethics committee years earlier. Vivian had shrewdly suggested him, knowing his reputation for uncompromising integrity would be an invaluable asset to our cause. During a legitimate hip assessment at an outpatient clinic, I finally secured a few precious minutes of private time with Sarah, my former assistant, her bright, intelligent eyes full of anticipation. "We're ready to proceed, Evelyn," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of medical equipment, while the doctor briefly examined my X-rays in the next room. "But we desperately need physical proof of the original will documents and the bank transfers. Without them, it's still your word against his, and he's built a very convincing, medically substantiated narrative about your mental health. We need something concrete." "My granddaughter," I said quietly, my voice a mere breath, "Lily, she's our key. She has access and crucially she still trusts me. She's the only one who can get into that safe without setting off alarms." That evening, while Clara supervised my bath with an almost obsessive attention to my medication intake, her eyes darting nervously, I noticed a palpable tension emanating from her. The manufactured evidence of my mental decline was working almost too well. They were clearly accelerating their timeline, pushing for a quick, decisive conclusion. "You must find it exhausting," I said vaguely, feigning a moment of empathy, my eyes wide and innocent, caring for someone so confused. "It must be a terrible burden." Clara's smile tightened, her facade momentarily cracking under the pressure. "Family takes care of family, Evelyn," she replied, her voice strained, a forced pleasantness that barely masked her irritation. "It's our duty." "Yes," I agreed, meeting her eyes for a fleeting moment, momentarily dropping my carefully constructed facade, letting a flash of my true self show through. "That's exactly what family should do." Something in my gaze, a flicker of the old Evelyn, made her step back, a tiny seed of doubt flickering in her eyes, a fleeting moment of unease. The moment passed swiftly as she quickly recovered, attributing it to a random fluctuation in my condition. But I had seen it, the first undeniable crack in their armor of confidence. Later that night, after another seemingly innocent crossword lesson with Lily, her brow furrowed in concentration over a difficult clue, I decided the time was right to reveal the full, horrifying truth. "Lily," I began, my voice soft but firm, "your parents are attempting to take control of all my assets, and they plan to dismantle the educational foundation your grandfather and I painstakingly planned. I've discovered your father falsified crucial documents while I was grieving after your grandfather's death. They're using my temporary physical condition, my fall, to declare me mentally incompetent and gain absolute control over everything I own. Lily's response, though initially shocked, her eyes widening in horror, showed a remarkable maturity and steely resolve. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice was firm. I've always felt something was terribly wrong in this house, Grandma. The way they talk about you, the way they hide things, the constant whispers, I knew it wasn't right. She looked at me, her expression resolute. How can I help? What can I do? I explained my urgent need to access the hidden safe behind the painting in Arthur's old study and to digitize the critical documents within, detailing the layout of the room, the position of the cameras, the guard's schedule. We formulated a meticulously detailed plan. Lily would create a significant distraction, a loud, dramatic incident that would divert Clara and the security guard, giving me a crucial window of mere minutes to access the safe. As she left my room, Lily paused at the doorway, her gaze locking with mine. Grandma, she said softly, her voice filled with admiration, a tear tracing a path down her cheek, I've watched you my whole life. You were never the kind of person who gave up, not on anything. That's why they're so utterly afraid of you. Her words, simple yet profound, strengthened my resolve, infusing me with a renewed sense of purpose. The psychologist who had spent decades ensuring emotional justice for others would not fail to secure it for herself. The Boston weather forecast had predicted a severe storm, and I had been meticulously monitoring it, understanding that extreme weather often brings power disruptions and, crucially, interference with electronic security systems. Backup generators are fueled and ready, I overheard David confidently instruct the head of security over the phone, his voice tight with controlled anxiety, standard protocol. Priority to surveillance systems, then climate control. Nothing can go wrong. We can't afford any glitches tonight. Perfect. The unpredictable chaos of nature would provide the perfect cover for my meticulously planned counterstrike, a fitting climax to their carefully constructed charade. When the storm finally hit, a violent tempest of high winds and torrential rain, the mansion's lights flickered erratically before plunging the vast house into a sudden, suffocating darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows, but the security systems, as I had anticipated, needed a critical 3 minutes to fully transition to backup power. That was my window. On cue, a piercing scream echoed from the main staircase, followed by a dramatic thud. It was Lily, executing her part of the plan with Oscar-winning precision, having seemingly fallen down the grand stairs, crying out in pain. Clara and the bewildered security guard rushed to her aid, their attention fully diverted, exactly as we had planned, their voices urgent, concerned. I moved swiftly, my movements surprisingly fluid and silent, the months of secretly practicing with my crutches paying off, transforming my disability into a deceptive advantage. I reached the painting concealing the safe within seconds. My fingers, steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, entered the combination I had memorized decades ago, the numbers a permanent imprint on my mind, etched there from a lifetime of secure thought. Inside, just as I remembered, were Arthur's original will, with its clear, precise stipulations for the educational foundation, detailed bank statements showing the unauthorized, systematic transfers David had made from my accounts. And most valuable of all, a cache of handwritten letters from Arthur, outlining his exact wishes for our estate and confirming the existence of the foundation, his elegant script a comforting presence. Using Vivian's small, high-resolution camera, I photographed each crucial document, ensuring every detail was captured, every page numbered, every signature documented. By the time the security systems hummed back to full power, a faint whirring sound permeating the silence, everything was meticulously back in place. No physical evidence of my intrusion. The storm raged through the night, a fitting backdrop for the psychological warfare that had been waged within these walls. In the morning, Dr. Noah Evans arrived for my official evaluation, completely unaware that a team of federal agents, using the inclement weather as natural cover, were already positioning themselves discreetly around the estate, their black suits almost invisible against the gray dawn. Despite Clara's indignant protests and her insistence on being present, Evans, citing strict ethical protocols, firmly insisted on privacy for the assessment. After an extensive battery of cognitive tests, his expression was solemn, yet resolute. He walked into the living room where David and Clara waited, their faces etched with nervous anticipation. Judge Hayes, he announced firmly, his voice carrying clearly, demonstrates not only full cognitive capacity, but one of the sharpest, most analytical minds I have encountered in my professional career. Any suggestion of mental incapacity is, in my professional opinion, completely unfounded and indeed ludicrous. Her recall is exceptional. As Clara, her face contorted in disbelief, attempted to furiously dispute his assessment, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly, the front door burst open. Federal agents, led by a no-nonsense prosecutor named Michael Sterling, presented search warrants for the residents in David's home office, their movements swift and decisive. The timing was no coincidence. It was the culmination of weeks of meticulous planning. A perfectly synchronized operation coordinated by Vivian Reed and federal prosecutor Sterling, based entirely on the irrefutable evidence I had provided. "What is the meaning of this?" David demanded, arriving home to find agents systematically cataloging files from his study, his voice cracking with outrage. "David Hayes," prosecutor Sterling stated formally, his voice cutting through the sudden silence, "we are investigating serious allegations of elder abuse, financial fraud, forgery, and judicial corruption. These warrants are fully executed." David's face drained of all color as his gaze locked onto me, sitting ramrod straight in my wheelchair, the feigned confusion entirely gone from my eyes. A flicker of raw fear, then dawning horror, crossed his features. "Mother," he managed, his voice barely a whisper, "this is all a terrible misunderstanding. You're confused, aren't you?" "Your Honor," I corrected him quietly, my voice ringing with a familiar, unwavering judicial authority, the voice that had once commanded silence in courtrooms. "You will address me as Your Honor." The storm outside, as if acknowledging the pronouncement, paused its fury, a momentary, eerie calm settling over the house, signaling that justice had finally arrived. 47 days, I said, breaking the stunned silence that followed, my voice clear and strong, resonating with a quiet power. "That's how long you thought you had until the competency hearing, David. That was your timeline. Instead, you now have precisely 47 minutes to decide how you wish to proceed with your legal representation." David stood frozen, a statue of disbelief, his eyes wide and vacant. Clara sat rigidly on the sofa, her carefully constructed composure utterly shattered, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Thomas and Diane looked utterly shell-shocked, caught in a nightmare they couldn't comprehend, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear and dawning understanding. Sterling methodically outlined the mounting charges: fraud, forgery, elder abuse, conspiracy, and judicial corruption, extending to Judge Miller and other implicated officials within David's network. "This isn't happening," Clara whispered, shaking her head frantically, her voice a reedy whine. "You're confused, Evelyn. You've been confused for months. Everyone has seen it." All the doctors agreed. "What everyone saw," I replied calmly, my gaze fixed on Clara, unwavering, "was an Academy Award-worthy performance from a former psychologist who spent decades observing human behavior, analyzing motives, and dissecting deception. I gave you exactly what you expected to see because it served my purpose, to gather incontrovertible evidence." Agents began bringing in boxes from David's office safe. Irrefutable forgeries of my signature, damning backdated authorizations for financial transfers, and, most damning of all, recorded conversations between David and Miller detailing their illicit schemes, played aloud for everyone to hear. "The beautiful thing about conspiracy," I continued, addressing David directly, my voice devoid of emotion, "is that it inherently requires communication between conspirators. You, David, left digital breadcrumbs everywhere: emails, phone records, text messages. Did you truly believe that I, a specialist in white-collar crime, wouldn't recognize the exact same patterns I spent decades prosecuting? Did you truly believe a trained psychologist would fall for such amateurish gaslighting?" Thomas stood abruptly, his face etched with a mix of terror and profound relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from him. "I had no idea about any of this, Evelyn. David told me you were having episodes, clear signs of dementia. He said we were just protecting you while he simultaneously emptied your accounts to cover your gambling debts." "Yes, Thomas," I finished for him, a touch of weary sadness in my voice, "I heard that conversation too. Every word." Clara's eyes darted frantically, searching for an escape, for a lifeline. "I was just following David's instructions. He handles all the financial matters. I was only concerned with Evelyn's care, she pleaded, her voice rising in desperation. Is that why you adjusted my medication without medical authorization, Clara? I asked, my voice cutting through her flimsy excuses, or why you specifically instructed the staff to isolate me from my friends. Or perhaps why you informed the Boston Museum Board that I was experiencing tragic mental deterioration when they called about my annual donation. Was that care? She had no answer, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into dust. David finally spoke, his voice tightly controlled, regaining a shred of his composure. These are serious allegations that I will address through proper legal channels. My mother has clearly misconstrued our efforts to protect her after a traumatic injury. Prosecutor Sterling stepped forward, his expression stern. Mr. Hayes, we have recordings of you discussing ways to declare your mother incompetent specifically to gain control of her assets before, and I quote, she reviews those foundation documents. And now, I added quietly, my voice resonating with a quiet triumph, those foundation documents have been reviewed, not just by me, but by federal investigators. They corroborate everything, Mr. Hayes. The room fell silent again, the only sound the distant siren of an approaching vehicle, broken only when Lily entered the room, her eyes wide but her chin held high. She walked directly to my side, a powerful, unspoken declaration of allegiance, her hand resting gently on my arm. Clara gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Lily, come here immediately. No, my granddaughter replied simply, her voice clear and strong. I'm staying with Grandma, she's not confused, she's brilliant. This family intervention is now over, I announced, looking around at their stunned faces. The real intervention has just begun. As federal agents began the formal process of arresting David and Clara, reading them their rights, I wheeled myself slowly to the window. News vans were already assembling outside, their bright lights piercing the lingering darkness of the storm, their cameras ready. My attention was drawn to a car pulling up to the curb. Sarah had arrived, accompanied by Dr. Marcus Reed, who, faced with the overwhelming evidence, had chosen integrity over complicity, a testament to his own conscience. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the profound weight of triumph and the lingering ache of tragedy. The psychologist had delivered her verdict, but the mother in me still grieved for what had been lost. 6 months later, the complex case against David reached its inevitable conclusion. He accepted a comprehensive plea agreement, which implicated Judge Miller and several other high-ranking officials in a much wider, deeply entrenched corruption scheme. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, no longer confined to a wheelchair, though I still relied on a slender cane for balance. Dedicated physical therapy had miraculously restored most of my mobility. Lily, who had moved in with me, squeezed my hand, her presence a constant source of comfort and strength. She was thriving, enrolled in advanced psychology courses at Georgetown, already showing a keen aptitude for observation and a budding interest in elder advocacy. Before I accept this plea arrangement, Judge Evelyn Chen addressed the court, her voice resonant and authoritative, her gaze sweeping over the courtroom, I wish to hear from the victim. Dr. Hayes, would you like to make a statement? I approached the podium, my steps steady, my gaze unwavering, my spine straight. Your Honor, I began, my voice clear and unwavering, cutting through the hushed silence of the courtroom, justice serves two essential functions: to hold accountable those who violate our laws and, crucially, to provide a tangible path for rehabilitation when possible, for both the perpetrators and the system itself. This case, though deeply personal, speaks to a broader systemic vulnerability. I could feel David's eyes fixed on me from the defense table, his expression unreadable. David Hayes violated not only statutory laws but more profoundly the fundamental human trust that forms the bedrock of family and society. He exploited a position of trust, a period of vulnerability, and sought to systematically dismantle my identity through psychological abuse. My voice faltered briefly, a raw admission of pain, a momentary tremor in my composure. As a mother, a psychologist, and a former judge, I confess I failed to recognize the subtle, insidious moral corruption festering within my own home until it was almost too late. I allowed myself to be gaslighted, to doubt my own mind, a cruel irony for someone who spent their career protecting the minds of others. I composed myself, my professional objectivity reasserting itself. The plea agreement, while acknowledging his egregious crimes, creates a critical framework for potential rehabilitation. I support it, not from maternal sentimentality, but from the unwavering principles of judicial and psychological reform. It provides a means for him to contribute, however minimally, to addressing the very issues he perpetrated. Regarding Clara, I stated, my voice firm, her calculated manipulation of my medication, coupled with her active participation in the gaslighting campaign, demonstrates a premeditated intent to inflict severe psychological and financial harm. I ask for no special consideration either for or against her based on family connection. Her actions warrant justice, unclouded by sentiment, in accordance with the full extent of the law. David would serve 7 years, eligible for parole after 5, contingent on his full cooperation with ongoing corruption investigations. Before being taken into custody, David looked at me, a flicker of genuine bewilderment in his eyes, a desperate plea. Why did you support the plea deal, mother? After everything I did, everything I put you through, why didn't you let me go to prison for life? Because justice isn't vengeance, David, I replied evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching, my voice soft but firm. I spent my entire career ensuring proportionate consequences, not merely punitive ones. True justice offers a chance for recalibration, for growth, even in the darkest circumstances. It's about the truth and about the possibility, however slim, of rebuilding. That's it, a legal principle, he asked, a hint of his old cynicism returning, unable to grasp the deeper meaning. No, David, I said, a soft, almost imperceptible sadness in my voice, a ghost of the past. I supported it because despite everything, despite the calculated cruelty, I still remember who you were before ambition and greed corrupted you. I remember the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the garden, the curious child who asked 1,000 questions. His eyes dropped, a rare moment of vulnerability, his shoulders slumping. I didn't start out planning all this, mother. It began with one small compromise, then another seemed easier, then another, it was a slippery slope. I know, I interrupted gently, a lifetime of professional experience echoing in my voice. I've heard that precise progression from countless defendants. The question now is whether you will use these years to rebuild your integrity and atone for your actions, or simply to plan your next scheme. The choice is yours. As guards escorted him away, his hands cuffed, David hesitated at the courtroom door, turning back to me, a question still lingering in his eyes. The foundation documents, did father really intend for it to be structured that way with so many restrictions and oversight provisions? It seemed so cumbersome, so controlled. Yes, I replied, my voice strong and clear, resonating with Arthur's unspoken wisdom, because he understood what you refused to learn. That power without accountability inevitably leads to corruption, even within families, David, especially within families. Later, in Arthur's restored study, now bathed in the gentle afternoon light filtering through the tall windows, I reflected on the profound experience of my psychological battle and its hard-won victory. The Hayes Elder Protection Act, establishing stringent new legal and medical safeguards against predatory behavior disguised as family care, now bore my name and was swiftly moving through the state legislature, a powerful testament to my ordeal and a beacon of hope for others. The Arthur Hayes Educational Foundation was fully operational, thriving, supporting 15 scholarship students from disadvantaged backgrounds, with Sarah Jenkins serving as its passionate and efficient executive director, her dedication unwavering. Thomas, now sober and genuinely contrite, was slowly rebuilding his life, managing a small, independent bookstore in my old neighborhood, finding solace in literature. Clara received a 3-year sentence for elder abuse and medication tampering. Her once prestigious social circle had completely evaporated, and she was now participating in mandatory community service with elderly residents. A stark, karmic irony, facing the very vulnerability she had sought to exploit. Judge Miller and 3 other corrupt officials were indicted in the widening corruption investigations sparked by my evidence, their illicit network dismantled. David was serving his sentence, having surprisingly found a purpose teaching legal literacy to other inmates, a glimmer of the man he could have been, and sending monthly letters to Lily and me, letters that showed genuine signs of reflection and remorse, slowly, painfully, rebuilding his own identity. Lily's voice carried from downstairs, warm and expectant, pulling me back to the present. Grandma, they're here. My first group of mentees, 5 exceptional women recently appointed to judicial positions, waited for me in the living room, their faces eager, their minds sharp. The judicial mentorship program was Vivian's brilliant idea. Your experience, Evelyn, shouldn't just change laws, It should profoundly shape the next generation of judges. You are a living testament to resilience. One young judge, her eyes wide with earnest curiosity, her notepad ready, asked, "How do you continue to believe in justice after experiencing such profound injustice personally from your own family? How do you trust again?" "Justice isn't an abstraction, my dear," I answered, my voice steady, filled with the wisdom of a lifetime's struggle and triumph. "It's a daily practice requiring unwavering vigilance, especially when applied to those closest to us. It is the unwavering commitment to truth, even when it's painful. The system isn't perfect, no, because people aren't perfect, but the core principles remain sound: accountability, proportionality, and the profound possibility of redemption." Later, I sat alone in Arthur's study, the quiet hum of the house a comforting presence. On the polished desk lay an invitation to chair a new federal task force on elder financial exploitation and psychological abuse, and a publisher's contract for my memoir, tentatively titled The Unseen Verdict. When the mind reclaims justice. Vivian called, her voice buzzing with excitement about tomorrow's Judicial Ethics Committee meeting. "They're creating a specialized division specifically for elder financial crimes and psychological abuse cases," she explained, her voice full of admiration. "They want your input on structuring it, Evelyn. Your insights are invaluable, your experience unparalleled." "Tell them I'll be there," I replied, a familiar, unwavering judicial certainty settling deeply in my voice, a resolve that had been forged in the crucible of betrayal. I hung up and touched the small, smooth gavel paperweight Arthur had given me when I received my federal appointment. For 35 years, it had sat on my various desks, a silent, powerful symbol of the authority entrusted to me. "The gavel never stopped," I whispered to the empty room, a profound realization echoing my earlier thought. "It just changed courtrooms, it found its true purpose. It is a symbol of my reclaimed sanity, my triumph over their insidious manipulations." In the soft lamplight of my study, surrounded by my cherished law books and the burgeoning case files for the new task force, I allowed myself a moment of quiet, profound satisfaction. Not triumph, the personal cost had been far too great for that, but the steady, unshaking resolve of a psychologist and a judge who had faced her most difficult case, the most insidious of manipulations, and had rendered a verdict true to her lifelong principles. Justice, delayed but determined, had finally come home, carried not by brute force but by the undeniable power of a resilient mind. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, please make sure to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments.